The wind carried the sharp tang of diesel and dust across the cracked asphalt of Jefferson High's parking lot, where Sarah Kane stood, her father's faded army jacket hanging loose on her wiry frame. It was too big, the cuffs rolled twice to free her hands, the hem brushing her knees. The jacket's olive drab had dulled to a ghost of its former self, its patches frayed but defiant, especially the one above her heart, a Special Forces tab, its threads barely clinging to the fabric. Around her, students spilled from the school's double doors, their laughter slicing through the November chill. Sarah's hazel eyes stayed fixed on the ground, her boots scuffing the pavement, as if she could will herself invisible. But the whispers followed her, sharp and deliberate, like knives thrown to nick but not kill. "Look at her, still wearing that rag," a voice cut through the crowd. It was Lauren Holt, her platinum hair catching the afternoon sun, her designer coat a stark contrast to Sarah's worn surplus. Lauren's friends, a cluster of seniors with polished nails and practiced smirks, giggled in unison. What's she trying to prove? That her dad was some kind of war hero? The words landed like a slap, but Sarah's face remained a mask, her jaw tight, her fingers curling into fists inside the jacket's pockets. She had heard it all before. Thrift store reject, wannabe soldier, liar. Each barb was a test, and she had learned to pass by saying nothing. Silence was her armor, though it never stopped the sting. The parking lot buzzed with the chaos of dismissal, car horns, revving engines, the distant shout of a coach calling practice. Sarah moved toward the edge of the crowd, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her steps measured but quick. She was 16, small for her age, with a sharpness to her features that spoke of hunger, not just for food, but for something less tangible. The jacket was her father's, the only piece of him she had left after the army sent back his belongings in a cardboard box. No medals, no letters, just the jacket and a folded flag her mother kept in a drawer. The patch, though, told a story no one here cared to read. To them, it was just a prop, a costume for a girl playing at something she wasn't. Bet she stole it from some surplus store, Lauren's friend Mia added, her voice pitched to Carrie. My dad says people fake military stuff all the time. It's pathetic. Mia's father owned the town's biggest car dealership, his billboards plastered along the highway into Willow Creek, Indiana. Money bought confidence, and Mia wielded it like a club. Sarah's grip tightened on her backpack strap, her knuckles whitening, but she kept walking. The accusation wasn't new, but it burned deeper today, the weight of it pressing against the truth she carried in her chest. Her father, Staff Sergeant Daniel Kane, had died in a classified operation when she was 9. The details were locked away, sealed by government red tape, leaving only rumors and her mother's quiet grief. The school sat on the edge of Willow Creek, a town of sagging porches and rusted pickup trucks, where the American flag flew high but trust was hard won. Sarah and her mother lived in a rented duplex on the wrong side of the tracks, their rent paid in cash from her mother's double shifts at the diner. The jacket was no fashion statement. It was warmth, memory, a shield against the world's indifference. But to her classmates, it was a target, a symbol of everything they assumed she lacked: status, proof, worth. Sarah reached the sidewalk, the crowd thinning as students peeled off toward their cars or the bus stop. She felt the eyes on her back, the whispers trailing like exhaust fumes. A gust of wind whipped her dark hair across her face, and she pushed it away, her fingers brushing the patch. Its texture was rough, grounding, a reminder of the man who'd worn it through deserts and jungles, who'd promised to come home but never did. She wanted to turn, to shout the truth, to make them see. But words had failed her before. Teachers who dismissed her, neighbors who pitied her, kids who laughed. Silence was safer, even if it cost her pieces of herself. Across the parking lot, a black SUV rolled to a stop, its tinted windows reflecting the gray sky. The door opened and a man stepped out, his posture ramrod straight, his civilian coat doing little to hide the military bearing etched into his frame. Colonel James Whitaker, a name known in Willow Creek only through grainy photos in the local paper, had come for the Veterans Day assembly. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the crowd, landing on Sarah. Not on her face, but on the patch. His expression shifted. Recognition, respect, something heavier. He stood still, one hand half raised as if caught between instinct and restraint. Sarah didn't notice him. She was focused on the bus idling at the curb, its exhaust clouding the air. She climbed aboard, the driver giving her a nod she barely returned. Inside, she took a seat near the back, the jacket's weight settling around her like a second skin. The whispers from the parking lot echoed in her mind, mingling with the hum of the engine. She leaned her head against the window, the glass cold against her temple, and closed her eyes. The patch pressed against her chest, a silent vow to endure. Back in the parking lot, Colonel Whitaker watched the bus pull away. His hand dropped to his side, but his gaze lingered. The patch was no surplus store knockoff. He'd seen it before on men who moved like ghosts, whose names were spoken in hushed tones. He turned to the school's principal, who was hurrying toward him with a clipboard and a nervous smile. "That girl," Whitaker said, his voice low, gravelly. "The one in the jacket." "Who is she?" The principal glanced at the bus, then back at Whitaker, her brow furrowing. "Sarah Kane, just a junior. Quiet, keeps to herself." She hesitated, then added, "Some of the kids give her a hard time about that jacket. They think she's pretending." Whitaker's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. He knew the patch, knew the cost of earning it, and he knew the kind of man who'd worn it. "Pretending," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. He turned toward the school, his steps deliberate, the weight of memory pulling him forward. Sarah Kane wasn't just a name now. She was a question, a truth waiting to be uncovered, and he would not let it stay buried. Inside the bus, Sarah opened her eyes, her reflection faint in the window. The whispers, the stares, the doubts. They were all there, waiting for her tomorrow. But something had shifted, a ripple she couldn't yet name. The patch, the jacket, her father's shadow, they were heavier now, but not a burden. They were a claim, a defiance, a story she would no longer let others tell for her. The diner's neon sign flickered against the dusk, casting a red glow across the gravel lot where Sarah Kane sat on a rusted bench, her father's jacket pulled tight against the evening chill. The air smelled of fried onions and motor oil, a mix that clung to Willow Creek like a second skin. Inside, her mother, Ellen Kane, moved between tables, her apron stained from a long shift, her smile a practiced mask for truckers and locals who barely tipped. Sarah's backpack rested at her feet, her algebra textbook open but ignored, its equations blurring under the weight of her thoughts. The whispers from school still echoed, Lauren's sneer, Mia's taunt, the word fake like a brand burned into her skin. She traced the Special Forces patch with her thumb, its frayed edges a map of a man she barely knew but fiercely loved. Inside the diner, Ellen paused by the counter, her eyes catching Sarah's silhouette through the window. At 38, Ellen carried the wear of years, lines etched around her eyes, hands rough from scrubbing dishes and floors. She knew the jacket's weight, not just its fabric, but its ghosts. Daniel Kane had been her anchor, her defiance against a world that judged their poverty, their loss. His death in a classified mission had left her with a folded flag, a few photographs, and a daughter who wore his jacket like a vow. Ellen pushed through the door, the bell jingling as she stepped outside. "You okay, kid?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with worry. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon where Fort Harrison's lights glowed faintly, a distant reminder of the life her father had lived. "Just thinking," she said, her words clipped, guarding the hurt she didn't want her mother to carry. Ellen sat beside her, the bench creaking under their combined weight. She smelled of coffee and grease, but her presence was warm, steady, a lighthouse in Sarah's storm. "They're still giving you grief about the jacket?" Ellen asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah's silence was confirmation enough, her fingers tightening around the patch as if it could shield her from the truth. "They say Dad wasn't real," Sarah said finally, her voice low, almost swallowed by the hum of a passing semi. "That I'm lying, that we're nobody." The words stung, each one a betrayal of the man whose photograph sat on their kitchen table, his eyes fierce and kind in his dress uniform. Ellen's jaw tightened, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that held both comfort and resolve. "They don't know him," she said. "They don't know us." "But they will." Her tone carried a promise, though she didn't yet know how to keep it. The diner door swung open again, and a figure stepped into the lot, Colonel James Whitaker, his civilian coat swapped for a crisp army uniform, the silver eagle of his rank catching the neon light. He moved with purpose, his boots crunching gravel, his eyes locking onto Sarah and Ellen with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Ellen stood, instinctive protectiveness pulling her upright. Sarah followed, her heart thudding, sensing the shift in the night's rhythm. Whitaker stopped a few feet away, his posture formal but his expression softer, almost reverent. "Mrs. Kane," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Colonel James Whitaker, Fort Harrison. May I speak with you and your daughter?" Ellen's eyes narrowed, assessing. Military visitors weren't new, condolence officers, bureaucrats with forms, but Whitaker's presence felt different, weightier. "About what?" she asked, her tone guarded. Sarah stood silent, her fingers brushing the patch, as if it could tell her why this man was here. Whitaker's gaze flickered to the jacket, then back to Ellen. "About Staff Sergeant Daniel Kane," he said. "And the jacket Sarah's wearing." "I recognized the patch today. It's not something you see every day." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes meeting Whitaker's. The patch, a faded triangle with a dagger and wings, was a relic most dismissed as decoration. But Whitaker's recognition was a spark, a validation that burned away the day's doubts. Ellen's posture softened slightly, though her guard remained. "You knew my husband?" she asked, her voice betraying a flicker of hope. Whitaker nodded, his expression tightening with memory. "Not personally, but I knew his unit. Special Forces, 5th Group. Men like him, they don't leave room for doubt." The diner's neon buzzed, a counterpoint to the silence that settled between them. Sarah's mind raced, piecing together fragments of her father's life, stories her mother told in whispers, letters never sent, a mission so secret it left them with nothing but grief. Whitaker's presence was a bridge to that shadow world, and she felt both drawn to it and afraid. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Whitaker's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "Because tomorrow's Veterans Day Assembly isn't just a ceremony. It's a chance to set things right. For your father. For you." Ellen's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder, a silent signal of trust and caution. "Set what right?" she asked. Whitaker glanced around the lot, ensuring they were alone, then lowered his voice. "There's a general coming tomorrow, General Margaret Holt. She served with your husband in Afghanistan. She knows what he did, what that patch means, and she wants to make sure this town knows it too." The name Holt hit Sarah like a jolt. Lauren Holt's mother, the general, a woman whose name was synonymous with Willow Creek's pride. The irony was sharp, cutting through the fog of her classmates' scorn. Sarah's eyes widened, her mind grappling with the implications. Lauren, who'd mocked her jacket, her life, was the daughter of a general who knew her father's truth. The contradiction was dizzying, a collision of worlds she hadn't anticipated. Ellen's expression mirrored her daughter's shock, but her voice stayed steady. "What does this mean for Sarah?" she asked. Whitaker's gaze shifted to the girl, his voice softening. "It means she won't have to carry this alone anymore. The general's requested to meet you both before the assembly. She wants to honor Daniel's service and Sarah's courage." The word courage landed like a stone in Sarah's chest, heavy and unfamiliar. She'd spent years hiding, deflecting, swallowing her pain to protect her mother, herself, the memory of a man she barely remembered. Courage was for soldiers, not for girls who wore their father's jackets to keep from falling apart. Yet Whitaker's eyes held no pity, only respect, and it stirred something in her, a flicker of pride, fragile but fierce. Ellen nodded slowly, her hand still on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll be there," she said, her voice a vow. Whitaker gave a curt nod, then handed Ellen a card with his contact information. "I'll see you tomorrow at 0800. The general's a stickler for punctuality." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening further. "You wear that jacket with pride, Sarah." "It's earned." He walked back to his SUV, the gravel crunching under his boots, leaving mother and daughter in the neon-lit silence. Ellen pulled Sarah close, her arm a steady anchor. "You okay with this?" she asked, searching her daughter's face. Sarah nodded, though her heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow would change everything, her classmates' whispers, her mother's burdens, her own silent battle. The jacket felt heavier now, not with shame but with purpose. She looked toward Fort Harrison's distant lights, a beacon of her father's world, and felt the first stirrings of a fight she was ready to face. The diner door jingled as a customer entered, pulling Ellen back to her shift. Sarah stayed on the bench, her fingers tracing the patch, her mind on the general who knew her father's truth. Tomorrow, Willow Creek would see her, not as a liar or a nobody, but as Daniel Kane's daughter. The thought was a spark, igniting something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. The morning air bit at Sarah Kane's knuckles as she walked toward Jefferson High, her father's army jacket a familiar weight against the November frost. Willow Creek's streets were quiet, the town still waking under a sky bruised with clouds. Her boots crunched on frost-dusted gravel, each step a metronome to the thoughts churning in her mind. Colonel Whitaker's visit last night had shifted something. Her silence, once a shield, now felt like a cage. The Special Forces patch, frayed but proud, pressed against her chest, a reminder of the man whose shadow loomed larger with each passing hour. Today, General Margaret Holt would speak at the Veterans Day Assembly, and Sarah's world, so carefully guarded, was about to crack open. Inside the school, the hallways buzzed with a restless energy. Banners in red, white, and blue draped the walls, their edges curling from years of use. The gymnasium doors stood open, revealing rows of folding chairs and a podium flanked by flags, the American stars and stripes, the Army's gold-fringed standard. Sarah moved through the crowd, her head low, the jacket's cuffs brushing her wrists. Students whispered as she passed, their voices a mix of curiosity and unease. Word had spread, carried by the small-town telegraph of gossip, that Sarah Kane was somehow tied to the general's visit. The shift was subtle but palpable. No one mocked her outright today, but their eyes lingered, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. In the cafeteria, Sarah found her usual corner table, its chipped surface a safe haven where she could watch without being seen. She pulled out a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, its pages soft from countless readings, but her eyes kept drifting to the clock. The assembly was at 10, and Colonel Whitaker had promised a meeting beforehand. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger but from the weight of what was coming. She wanted the truth about her father to be known, yet feared the spotlight it would cast. The jacket, her armor, felt both heavier and more fragile, as if it might unravel under the scrutiny. Ethan Cole slid into the seat across from her, his freckled face bright with the kind of loyalty that didn't need words. At 15, he was an oddity in Willow Creek, a mechanic's son who wore his optimism like a badge, untouched by the cynicism that clung to their classmates. "You nervous about the general?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Sarah's fingers paused on the book's spine, her hazel eyes meeting his. "A little," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they still don't believe me?" Ethan's grin was quick, unwavering. "They will! You've got the army on your side now!" Before Sarah could respond, Lauren Holt's voice cut through the cafeteria's hum. "So, Sarah's the big star today?" She stood at the center of her usual circle, her designer scarf a splash of color against her tailored coat. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, assessing, like a predator sensing a shift in the wind. Her friends, Mia, Chloe, others, stood close, their smiles tight, uncertain. Lauren's mother was General Holt, a fact that gave her social capital but now carried a new weight. If the general knew Sarah's father, what did that mean for Lauren's months of mockery? Sarah met her gaze, her jaw tight, and said nothing. Silence was still her weapon, but it felt sharper now, edged with defiance. The bell rang, signaling the start of the day, but the usual rush to class was subdued, the assembly's gravity pulling everyone toward the gymnasium. Sarah lingered, waiting for the crowd to thin, until a familiar figure approached, Colonel Whitaker, his uniform crisp, his presence parting the sea of students like a blade. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "General Holt's ready to meet you. Your mother's already there." Sarah nodded, her throat tight, and followed him, Ethan giving her a quick thumbs up as she left. The principal's office, usually a place of detention slips and forgotten forms, had been transformed into a makeshift command post. General Margaret Holt stood by the window, her posture rigid, her uniform adorned with ribbons that spoke of decades in combat zones. At 52, her face was lined but fierce, her gray eyes carrying the weight of battles fought and soldiers lost. Ellen Kane sat in a chair, her diner uniform swapped for a simple dress, her hands clasped to hide their tremble. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes truths too long buried. "Sarah," General Holt said, turning from the window, her voice steady but warm. "I'm honored to meet you." Her gaze dropped to the jacket, lingering on the Special Forces patch, and something softened in her expression. Grief, respect, recognition. "That was your father's?" Sarah nodded, her voice caught somewhere deep, unable to form words. Holt's eyes met hers, holding a weight Sarah couldn't yet name. "I served with Staff Sergeant Daniel Kane in 2016. He was one of the best men I ever knew." Ellen's breath hitched, her hand reaching for Sarah's. The general's words were a lifeline, pulling them from years of silence and doubt. "What did he do?" Sarah asked, her voice small but steady, the question she'd carried since she was 9. Holt's expression tightened, navigating the line between truth and classification. "Your father was part of a covert operation in Syria," she said. "His team saved lives, mine included. The details are still restricted, but his courage wasn't... That patch is proof of it." Sarah's fingers brushed the patch, its texture grounding her as the general's words sank in. Her father wasn't just a name on a folded flag. He was a man who'd stood between life and death, who'd carried others to safety. The truth was a blade cutting through the lies she'd endured, but it also sharpened her fear. What would this mean for her mother, for the town that had dismissed them? Ellen's eyes glistened, but she held her composure, her hand steady on Sarah's. "Thank you," she said to Holt, her voice thick. "We never knew. Not really." Holt nodded, her gaze shifting to the door where Principal Carter hovered, his tie slightly askew, his nerves evident. "The assembly's about to start," she said. "Sarah, I'd like you to walk with me." Your father's story deserves to be heard, and so does yours." Sarah's heart pounded, her palms damp inside the jacket's pockets. To stand before the school, to claim her father's truth, was both a dream and a terror. She looked at her mother, seeking the strength she'd always found there. Ellen's nod was small but certain, a silent vow that they'd face this together. As they left the office, the hallway seemed to close in, the walls lined with curious eyes. Lauren Holt stood near the gymnasium doors, her arms crossed, her face a mask of conflict. Her mother's presence, her knowledge of Sarah's father, had unraveled the narrative she'd built. Sarah met her gaze, not with anger, but with something fiercer: truth. The general's hand rested lightly on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of protection and pride. The gymnasium loomed ahead, its doors open, the murmur of the crowd a rising tide. Sarah felt the patch against her chest, her father's courage stitched into its threads, and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The gymnasium smelled of polished wood and anticipation, its air thick with the rustle of hundreds of students settling into folding chairs. Sarah Kane walked beside General Margaret Holt, her father's army jacket a quiet rebellion against the eyes that tracked her every step. The Special Forces patch, faded but unyielding, caught the overhead lights, its threads glinting like a challenge. The crowd's murmur faded to a hush as the general's boots echoed on the hardwood, each step a drumbeat of authority. Sarah's heart thudded, her palms slick inside the jacket's pockets, but she kept her chin up, her hazel eyes fixed on the podium ahead. Her mother, Ellen, followed close behind, her presence a steady anchor in the sea of scrutiny. Principal Carter stood at the podium, his hands gripping its edges, his voice straining to match the moment's gravity. "Students, faculty, honored guests," he began, his words clipped by nerves. "We are privileged today to welcome General Margaret Holt, United States Army, to our Veterans Day Assembly." A ripple of applause broke the silence, but Sarah felt it like a wave pressing against her chest. She stood beside Holt, her small frame dwarfed by the general's commanding presence, the jacket's weight both shield and burden. The crowd's eyes, curious, skeptical, awed, pinned her in place, stripping away the invisibility she'd cultivated for years. Holt stepped to the podium, her posture rigid, her gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a soldier scanning a battlefield. "Thank you, Principal Carter," she said, her voice clear, carrying the weight of decades in command. "Today is about honoring service, sacrifice, and the families who carry the cost." Her eyes flicked to Sarah, a fleeting acknowledgement that sent a shiver down the girl's spine. "But before I speak on that, there's a story this community needs to hear, one of courage, loss, and truth." The gymnasium fell silent, the kind of quiet that hums with expectation. Sarah's breath caught, her fingers brushing the patch, its rough texture grounding her against the rising tide of nerves. Lauren Holt, seated in the third row, shifted uncomfortably, her platinum hair catching the light, her face a mask of dread. Her mother's presence, her knowledge of Sarah's father, had turned her social throne into a precarious ledge. Beside her, Mia and Chloe exchanged glances, their earlier confidence eroded by the general's tone. Ethan Cole, near the back, watched Sarah with a proud grin, his loyalty a beacon in the crowd's uncertainty. "3 days ago," Holt continued, "I learned of a student here who's been mocked for wearing a military jacket, accused of pretending a connection to service." Her voice hardened, not with anger but with the steel of truth. "That student is Sarah Kane, and this jacket belonged to her father, Staff Sergeant Daniel Kane, 5th Special Forces Group." A gasp rippled through the crowd, soft but sharp, like wind through dry grass. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she stood still, her silence a testament to the strength she'd honed through months of cruelty. Holt's gaze softened as she turned to Sarah, her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Daniel Kane served with me in Syria 2016. His team ran a covert extraction under heavy fire, saving 8 American lives, including mine. Her words landed like stones, each one sinking into the audience's assumptions, shattering them. He paid the ultimate price. His mission was classified, leaving his family, Sarah and her mother, Ellen, to carry his loss without the recognition they deserved. Ellen's eyes glistened in the front row, her hands clasped tight, holding back the grief and pride that warred within her. Sarah felt the weight of every stare, but Holt's hand was steady, grounding. The patch, once a target for scorn, now glowed with meaning, its frayed edges a testament to her father's sacrifice. "This jacket," Holt said, gesturing to the faded fabric, "bears the Special Forces patch, earned through courage most will never understand. Sarah wears it not for attention, but to honor a hero." The word hero hung in the air, heavy with truth, and Sarah's throat tightened, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She'd carried her father's memory in silence, but now it was spoken, undeniable, real. Lauren's face drained of color, her hands twisting in her lap. The general's daughter, who'd wielded her mother's status like a weapon, now faced its double edge. Her mockery of Sarah, her accusations of lies, crumbled under the weight of her mother's words. Mia whispered something, but Lauren didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the floor, shame creeping into her posture. In the back, Ethan's grin widened, his faith in Sarah vindicated. The crowd's mood shifted, whispers of awe, guilt, respect, replacing the skepticism that had shadowed Sarah for months. Holt's voice softened, but its authority never wavered. "Military families like the Canes carry burdens we cannot see. When you judge them, you judge the sacrifices that keep this nation free." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on the students who'd led the harassment, their discomfort palpable. "Sarah has shown more strength in her silence than most could muster in a lifetime. She's her father's daughter." The words struck Sarah like a spark, igniting pride she hadn't dared feel. She stood taller, the jacket no longer a burden, but a badge, its weight a privilege. The general stepped back, gesturing for Sarah to join her at the podium. Sarah hesitated, her heart racing, but Holt's nod was firm, encouraging. She stepped forward, her boots scuffing the polished floor, and faced the crowd. Hundreds of eyes met hers, classmates, teachers, community members, media cameras blinking red. She swallowed, her voice small but clear. "My dad loved this country," she said, her words steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He gave everything for it. I wear his jacket to remember him, not to prove anything." The simplicity of her truth silenced the room, its power cutting through years of doubt. Holt placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, her expression one of pride and resolve. "Today we correct a wrong," she said, producing a small velvet box from her uniform pocket. The crowd leaned forward, anticipation thick. Staff Sergeant Daniel Kane was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his actions in Syria. His family was never formally presented with it due to the mission's classification. She opened the box, revealing a gleaming, star-shaped medal, its silver catching the light. "Sarah, Ellen, this belongs to you." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the box, its weight heavier than its size suggested. The medal was cold, solid, a tangible piece of her father's courage. Ellen stood, joining her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she touched the medal, her fingers lingering on its edges. The crowd was silent, the moment sacred, unbroken by applause or whispers. Sarah felt the patch against her chest, its threads now woven with this new truth, a legacy no one could question. Holt turned to the audience, her voice firm. "Let this be a lesson. Honor those who serve and those who carry their memory." Sarah Kane has done both with grace. The gymnasium erupted in applause, not raucous but reverent, a wave of respect that washed over Sarah, threatening to overwhelm her. She clutched the metal, her father's presence closer than it had been in years. Lauren's head bowed, her hands covering her face, the weight of her misjudgment a public reckoning. The assembly wasn't over, but the truth was out, and Sarah stood at its center, no longer invisible, no longer silent. The gymnasium's applause faded, leaving a hush that pressed against Sarah Kane's ears like a held breath. She stood beside General Margaret Holt, the Silver Star Medal cold in her hands, its weight anchoring her to the moment. The Special Forces patch on her father's jacket seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights, its frayed threads a silent testament to truths finally spoken. Her mother, Ellen, stood close, her fingers brushing Sarah's arm, a lifeline in the sea of eyes that watched them, students, teachers, media, all reevaluating the girl they'd dismissed. Sarah's heart pounded, but her chin stayed high, her hazel eyes scanning the crowd, no longer hiding. The air carried the faint scent of wax and sweat, the gymnasium's polished floor reflecting the flags that flanked the podium. General Holt's presence was a shield, her uniform a stark contrast to Sarah's worn jacket, yet both spoke of service, of sacrifice. "Thank you, Sarah," Holt said, her voice low, meant only for the girl. "You've honored your father today." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight for words, the medal a heavy truth she wasn't sure she could carry. Ellen's eyes glistened, but her posture was steady, a mother's strength forged through years of silent grief. Principal Carter returned to the podium, his earlier nervousness softened by the ceremony's weight. "General Holt, Sarah, Mrs. Kane, our community owes you our gratitude and our apologies." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion behind his formal tone. "We've learned something today about courage, about respect." The crowd stirred, a murmur of agreement rippling through the rows. Sarah felt the shift, the way eyes that once mocked now held awe, guilt, or something in between. Lauren Holt, in the third row, sat rigid, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. The general's daughter, once untouchable, now faced a reckoning tied to her mother's words. Holt stepped back, gesturing for Sarah and Ellen to sit in the front row, where chairs had been reserved for them. As Sarah settled, the metal box still clutched in her hands, she caught Ethan Cole's eye from across the room. His grin was wide, unshakable, a beacon of loyalty that steadied her. The general resumed her speech, her voice weaving stories of military service, missions in deserts, jungles, places Sarah could only imagine. But her mind drifted to the jacket, to the father she'd known through stories and silences. The medal was proof, but the patch was personal, a piece of him she'd carried through Willow Creek's cruelty. The assembly ended with a standing ovation, the crowd rising as one, their applause a wave that threatened to drown Sarah's composure. She stood with her mother, the metal box a shared burden, and followed Holt toward a side exit where media waited, cameras blinking like eager eyes. Colonel Whitaker met them there, his expression a mix of pride and vigilance. "You did well, Sarah," he said, his voice low, grounding. "But the press will want a piece of you now. We'll keep it controlled." Ellen's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder, a silent vow to protect her from the spotlight's glare. Outside the gymnasium, the hallway was a gauntlet of whispers and glances. Students lingered, their usual rush to class slowed by the morning's revelations. Lauren Holt stood near a locker, her entourage scattered, her confidence fractured. She caught Sarah's eye, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing, the weight of her mother's speech a barrier she couldn't cross. Sarah held her gaze, not with triumph, but with a quiet resolve. She didn't need Lauren's apology, not yet. The truth was enough for now. In a small conference room, the media waited, 2 local reporters and a regional news crew, their cameras and notepads ready to capture the story of the girl in the jacket. General Holt stood beside Sarah and Ellen, her presence a buffer against their questions. "Sarah's father was a hero," Holt said, her tone firm, preempting any sensationalism. This family has carried his loss with dignity. They deserve respect, not scrutiny. The reporters nodded, their questions gentle but persistent, about Daniel Kane, the jacket, the bullying. Sarah answered sparingly, her voice steady but soft, letting the medal and her mother's presence speak louder than words. Ellen's responses were measured, her diner-weary hands steady as she described their life after Daniel's death, the struggle, the silence, the jacket that kept his memory alive. "Sarah wore it to feel close to him," she said, her voice thick but controlled. "She shouldn't have had to defend that." The reporters scribbled, their faces softening, sensing a story that transcended headlines. Sarah watched them, her fingers tracing the patch, its texture a reminder of why she'd endured. The truth was out, but its weight was new, a responsibility she was only beginning to understand. As the interview ended, Whitaker escorted the reporters out, leaving Sarah, Ellen, and Holt in the room's quiet. The general knelt to meet Sarah's eyes, her expression softer now, almost maternal. "Your father would be proud," she said. "Not just of his service, but of you. You've got his strength." Sarah swallowed, the words sinking deep, stirring pride and pain in equal measure. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice barely audible, the metal box heavy in her hands. The rest of the school day passed in a blur, the usual rhythm of classes disrupted by the assembly's aftershocks. Teachers looked at Sarah differently, their nods tinged with respect, their assignments lighter, as if acknowledging the weight she already carried. Ethan stayed close, his chatter a welcome distraction, though even he sensed the change in her. A quiet fierceness, a girl remade by truth. Lauren and her friends kept their distance, their silence louder than their earlier taunts. The jacket, once a target, now felt like a crown, its patch a badge no one could question. After school, Sarah walked home with Ellen, the November air sharp against their faces. Willow Creek's streets were alive with the usual hum, pickup trucks rumbling, kids shouting from porches, but the town felt different, its gaze softened by the morning's revelations. Neighbors waved, their smiles tentative but genuine, as if seeing the Kanes for the first time. At their duplex, the faded paint and sagging porch seemed less a mark of struggle and more a testament to survival. Inside, Ellen set the metal box beside Daniel's photograph, its frame worn but proud, a shrine to a man finally honored. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her homework untouched, her eyes on the metal. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small but steady, the question encompassing everything: school, the town, their future. Ellen sat across from her, her hands wrapping around a mug of coffee, its steam curling in the dim light. "Now we live with the truth," she said. "It won't erase everything, but it's ours to carry, not hide." Her words were a promise, a map for the path ahead where pride and pain would walk hand in hand. Outside, Fort Harrison's lights glowed in the distance, a reminder of the world her father had belonged to, now reaching out to claim them. Sarah touched the patch, its threads a lifeline to a man she was only beginning to understand. The day had changed her, not just in Willow Creek's eyes, but in her own. She was Daniel Kane's daughter, and that truth, once a burden, was now a fire, burning bright against the gathering dusk. The November wind rattled the windows of the Kane's duplex, carrying the faint hum of Willow Creek, settling into evening. Sarah Kane sat at the kitchen table, her father's army jacket draped over the chair's back, its Special Forces patch catching the dim glow of a single bulb. The Silver Star medal rested beside Daniel Kane's photograph, its silver glinting like a star pulled from the night sky. Sarah's fingers hovered over the medal, not touching, as if its weight might burn. Her mother, Ellen, moved through the kitchen, her hands steady as she washed dishes, but her eyes kept drifting to her daughter, reading the silence that had grown heavier since the assembly. The town was different now. Neighbors who once passed their duplex with indifference now offered nods or quiet words of respect. The Veterans Day Assembly, broadcast on local news, had rippled outward, transforming Sarah from the girl in the thrift store jacket to the daughter of a hero. But the change was a double-edged blade. Validation came with visibility, and Sarah felt the weight of eyes wherever she went. At school, the whispers had shifted from mockery to awe, but they still followed her, a shadow she couldn't shake. She wanted her father's truth to be enough, but the world's gaze made her feel exposed, a raw nerve under scrutiny. Ellen dried her hands on a worn dish towel and sat across from Sarah, her face etched with the quiet strength that had carried them through years of grief. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, her voice soft but probing, like a hand reaching through fog. Sarah's hazel eyes met hers, then dropped to the metal. "It's just a lot," she said, her words careful, measured. "Everyone knows now, but I don't know how to be this." She gestured vaguely at the medal, the jacket, the weight of her father's legacy. Ellen nodded, understanding the unspoken. The truth had freed them, but it had also bound them to a new kind of expectation. The doorbell chimed, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the kitchen's stillness. Sarah tensed, her fingers curling into her palms. Ellen rose, her movements deliberate, and opened the door to find Colonel James Whitaker standing on the porch, his uniform traded for civilian clothes that did little to soften his military bearing. Beside him stood Evelyn Carter, a retired nurse and Willow Creek's unofficial guardian of military families, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Evening, Ellen," Whitaker said, his voice low, respectful. "May we come in? We've got something to discuss." Ellen stepped aside, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. Sarah stood, her heart thudding, the jacket's patch a silent anchor as she faced the visitors. The small living room felt smaller with Whitaker's presence, his frame filling the space like a promise of authority. Evelyn settled into a chair, her hands folded, her demeanor that of someone who'd seen too many families like the Canes to waste words. "Sarah, Ellen," she began, "the assembly changed things. Not just for you, but for this town. We're here to talk about what comes next." Whitaker nodded, his gaze settling on Sarah. "General Holt's speech opened doors," he said. "Your father's Silver Star wasn't just a medal. It's a key to resources you should have had years ago. Scholarships, support programs, community recognition." He paused, his eyes flicking to the jacket. "Daniel Kane's service earned you that, and we're here to make sure it's honored." Sarah's throat tightened, the idea of her father's sacrifice translating into tangible help, both overwhelming and grounding. Ellen's hands clasped tighter, her voice steady but laced with hope. "What kind of support?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice warm but firm. "There's a fund for children of fallen soldiers, educational grants, counseling, even relocation assistance if you need it. Fort Harrison's family services are stepping in to ensure you're not navigating this alone." She glanced at Sarah, her eyes softening. "And there's a mentorship program for kids like you, Sarah. Military families, veterans, people who understand what you've carried." Sarah's fingers brushed the patch, its texture a reminder of her father's world, now reaching out to hold her. Whitaker pulled a folder from his briefcase, its pages crisp with official seals. "This is a start," he said, sliding it toward Ellen. "Paperwork for the Silver Star benefits, plus contacts for veteran organizations in Willow Creek. They want to meet you, help you build a network." Ellen opened the folder, her eyes scanning the forms, the weight of years spent scraping by lifting slightly with each line. "This could change things," she said softly, almost to herself. "School, a better place to live." Her voice trailed off, the possibilities too vast to voice fully. Sarah's mind churned, the metal's gleam pulling her thoughts back to the assembly, General Holt's words, Lauren's silence, the crowd's applause. The truth was out, but it came with a cost. "Will people expect me to be different now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Whitaker's expression softened, a rare crack in his military facade. "They'll expect you to be you, Sarah. The girl who stood up for her father's memory, who wore that jacket through hell." "That's enough." Evelyn nodded, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent with military families. "You've already shown them what strength looks like. Now you get to decide what it means for you." She reached into her bag, pulling out a small pamphlet about a youth leadership program for military kids. "This could be a start, a place to find others who get it, who've walked your path." Sarah took the pamphlet, its glossy cover strange against her calloused fingers. The idea of belonging, of a community beyond Willow Creek's judgment, stirred something fragile but fierce in her chest. The conversation shifted to logistics. Meetings with Fort Harrison's support team, a scholarship application due next month, a community event to honor local veterans. Whitaker and Evelyn spoke with the calm efficiency of people used to navigating bureaucracy, but their words carried a warmth that made the Canes' small duplex feel less like a battleground. As they prepared to leave, Whitaker paused at the door, his eyes on Sarah. "You're carrying your father's legacy," he said. "But you're building your own, too. Don't forget that." After they left, the duplex settled back into its familiar quiet, the hum of the refrigerator a soft counterpoint to Sarah's thoughts. She sat again, the jacket draped over her shoulders now, its weight a comfort rather than a burden. Ellen returned to the table, her eyes bright with a hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. "This is a chance, Sarah," she said. "Not just for us, but for you. To be more than this town's whispers." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the patch, its threads a map of her father's courage and her own. Outside, the lights of Fort Harrison glowed against the night, a beacon of a world that had finally seen them. Sarah thought of school tomorrow, of Lauren's shame, Ethan's loyalty, the teachers who'd misjudged her. The truth had changed her place in Willow Creek, but it had also changed her. She was no longer just the girl in the jacket. She was Daniel Cain's daughter, a keeper of his fire, and that truth burned brighter than any doubt could extinguish. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across Willow Creek's quiet streets. Sarah Cain walked to Jefferson High, her father's army jacket slung over her shoulder, the Special Forces patch a quiet emblem of her transformed reality. The Silver Star Medal, now displayed in a simple wooden case beside Daniel Cain's photograph, had shifted the town's perception of her family, but the weight of that change pressed against her chest. Each step crunched on the frost-kissed sidewalk, the November air sharp with the promise of winter. Sarah's hazel eyes scanned the horizon, where Fort Harrison's silhouette loomed, no longer a distant symbol but a bridge to her father's world. Inside the school, the hallways hummed with a subdued energy, the Veterans Day Assembly's echoes lingering in whispered conversations and sidelong glances. The red, white, and blue banners still hung, their colors faded but defiant, much like Sarah's jacket. Students parted as she passed, their eyes carrying a mix of respect and uncertainty. The mockery had stopped, replaced by a cautious awe, but Sarah felt the weight of their attention, a spotlight she hadn't sought. She adjusted the jacket, its cuffs brushing her wrists, and moved toward her locker, her movements deliberate, a silent claim to her new place in this world. At her locker, Ethan Cole waited, his freckled face bright with the easy grin that had anchored her through months of cruelty. "You look different today," he said, leaning against the metal, his voice light but knowing. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a rare half-smile. "It's just the jacket," she said, though they both knew it was more. The assembly, the medal, General Holt's words, they'd carved a new shape to her presence, one that Willow Creek was still learning to navigate. Ethan nudged her shoulder, his loyalty a steady pulse. It's you, Sarah. They see it now. The morning bell rang, pulling them toward first period, but the usual rhythm of classes felt altered, as if the school itself was recalibrating. In English, Mrs. Larson, a teacher who'd once overlooked Sarah's quiet diligence, now called on her with a respectful nod. "Sarah, what's your take on Atticus Finch's courage?" she asked, her tone free of the pity that had once colored her voice. Sarah paused, her fingers brushing the patch through the jacket's fabric, grounding herself. "He stood up for what was right, even when everyone was against him," she said, her voice clear, steady. "It's not about winning. It's about not giving up." The class was silent, her words carrying a weight that mirrored her own story. At lunch, Sarah took her usual corner table, her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird open but unread. Ethan joined her, his tray clattering against the chipped surface, but another figure approached, hesitant, her shadow falling across the table. Lauren Holt stood there, her platinum hair tucked behind her ears, her designer scarf absent, her posture stripped of its usual confidence. "Sarah," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the cafeteria's hum. "Can I sit?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her book, but she nodded, a single guarded motion. Lauren sat, her hands twisting in her lap, her face a map of conflict. "I was wrong," she said, the words raw, unpracticed. "About your dad, the jacket, everything. I didn't know." Her voice cracked, and Sarah saw the shame in her eyes, not just for the mockery but for the ignorance that had fueled it. Lauren's mother, General Holt, had dismantled her daughter's narrative, and the fallout was a public reckoning. Sarah's silence stretched, not out of cruelty but caution, weighing the sincerity of the apology against months of pain. "Okay," she said finally, her tone neutral, neither forgiving nor condemning. Lauren's shoulders sagged, relief and regret warring in her expression, and she left without another word. The afternoon passed in a haze of lessons, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, replaying Colonel Whitaker's visit, the scholarship forms, the promise of a community that saw her. After school, she met her mother at the diner, where Ellen was finishing a shift, her apron still tied but her face brighter, lifted by the possibilities Whitaker had outlined. They walked home together, the duplex's sagging porch a familiar sight, but the air between them felt lighter, as if the weight of their secrets had been shared with the world. Inside, Ellen set a stack of papers on the kitchen table. Scholarship applications, veteran support contacts, a letter from Fort Harrison outlining benefits for families of Silver Star recipients. "This could mean college," she said, her voice thick with hope. "A real future, Sarah." Sarah's fingers traced the patch, its threads a tether to her father's courage, now woven into her own. "I want to study history," she said, the words surprising her with their certainty. "To understand people like Dad, what they fought for." Ellen's eyes glistened, pride and grief mingling in her smile. "He'd love that," she said, her hand covering Sarah's, a shared vow to carry Daniel's legacy forward. The doorbell rang, and Sarah opened it to find Evelyn Carter, her gray hair catching the evening light, a folder in her hands. "I've got something for you," she said, stepping inside with the brisk efficiency of a woman who'd spent decades organizing lives. She handed Sarah a flyer for a regional military youth conference, a gathering of kids like her, children of service members, carrying their own quiet burdens. "You'd be a voice there," Evelyn said. "Your story matters, Sarah. Not just for you, but for them." Sarah took the flyer, its weight light but significant, a door to a world where she wasn't alone. As Evelyn left, the duplex settled into its familiar quiet, the hum of the refrigerator a soft backdrop to Sarah's thoughts. She sat by Daniel's photograph, the silver star beside it, and felt the patch against her chest. The town had changed, but so had she. No longer the invisible girl, but a keeper of truth, a daughter of valor. Outside, Fort Harrison's lights glowed, a reminder that her father's world was hers now, too, its strength hers to claim. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Sarah felt ready to walk it, her silence no longer a shield, but a choice. Her father's legacy a fire that burned steady within her. Spring sunlight spilled through the windows of Jefferson High's library, painting the room in hues of gold and green. Sarah Kane sat at a round table. A group of freshmen gathered around her, their eyes wide with the kind of admiration reserved for those who faced fire and emerged unbroken. Her father's army jacket hung in a glass display case near the library's entrance, its Special Forces patch preserved as a testament to Daniel Kane's sacrifice. Sarah wore a new jacket now, a simple denim one, but the weight of her father's legacy clung to her, no longer a burden but a mantle she wore with quiet pride. At 16, she was no longer the invisible girl of Willow Creek, Indiana, but a voice, a symbol, a daughter who'd claimed her place. The library was a sanctuary, its shelves heavy with books and the faint scent of paper and polish. Sarah held a picture book about military service, its pages open to a story of a soldier who saved his team. "He didn't fight for glory," she read, her voice clear, steady, carrying the weight of her own truth. "He fought for the people beside him." The freshmen listened, rapt, their questions bubbling up with innocent curiosity. "Was your dad like that?" a girl named Ava asked, her braids swinging as she leaned forward. Sarah paused, her hazel eyes softening, the silver star's memory a quiet pulse in her chest. "Yes," she said simply. "He was." The Veterans Day Assembly, 5 months past, had reshaped Willow Creek. The town, once quick to judge the Kanes' poverty, now embraced them as a military family whose sacrifice demanded respect. Sarah's story, amplified by regional news, had sparked change. A scholarship fund named for Daniel Kane, a veteran support program led by Ellen, and a school curriculum that taught empathy over assumption. Sarah's life had shifted too. The duplex on the wrong side of the tracks was now a small house on Cedar Lane, its porch sturdy, its walls adorned with photographs of Daniel, the Silver Star, in its case a quiet centerpiece. Ellen Kane stood at the library's doorway, her diner apron replaced by a blazer, her new role as the school district's family liaison coordinator giving her a purpose that matched her strength. She watched Sarah read, pride swelling in her chest, tempered by the ache of all they'd endured. The scholarship papers, signed and submitted, promised Sarah a path to college, to studying history, to understanding the wars and sacrifices that shaped her father's life. Ellen's hands, once rough from endless shifts, now held folders of resources for other military families, a mission born from her own years of silent struggle. Outside, Willow Creek hummed with its usual rhythm. Pickup trucks, kids on bikes, the distant rumble of a train. But the town felt different, its heart softened by the Kanes' story. Neighbors who'd once pitied them now stopped to talk, their words carrying respect rather than condescension. Even Lauren Holt, whose cruelty had once cut deep, had changed. She volunteered at Fort Harrison's Family Center, her apologies to Sarah evolving into quiet acts of amends. "I'm learning," she'd told Sarah last week, her voice stripped of its old arrogance. Sarah had nodded, her response measured, a bridge not fully built but no longer burned. Ethan Cole, ever loyal, sat near the back of the library, his grin a constant in Sarah's shifting world. "You're a natural," he whispered as the reading session ended, the freshmen dispersing with chatter and laughter. Sarah smiled, a rare full smile, her fingers brushing the denim jacket where the Special Forces patch once lay. "Thanks for sticking around," she said, her voice warm, grounded. Ethan's loyalty had been her anchor, a reminder that some saw her truth before the world did. Evelyn Carter, the retired nurse who'd championed Sarah's cause, entered the library, her gray hair catching the sunlight. She carried a stack of flyers for the Daniel Kane Memorial Scholarship, its first recipients to be announced at the upcoming Memorial Day ceremony. "You've done more than you know," she told Sarah, her voice thick with pride. "This town, these kids, they'll carry your father's story forward." Sarah nodded, the weight of that responsibility settling comfortably now, a purpose she'd grown into. As the library emptied, Sarah lingered by the display case, her eyes on the jacket. Its folds held memories of her father's courage, her mother's resilience, her own silent battles. The silver star in its case at home was proof of Daniel's heroism, but the jacket was hers, a piece of him she'd carried through doubt and vindication. She thought of the military youth conference she'd attend next month, a chance to share her story with others who understood the cost of service. The thought stirred excitement, a spark of possibility that felt like her father's fire. Ellen joined her, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. "Ready to head home?" she asked, her voice a mix of maternal warmth and shared triumph. Sarah nodded, her gaze lingering on the jacket. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady, certain. "Let's go." They stepped into the spring air, the town's streets alive with promise. Fort Harrison's lights glowed in the distance, no longer a far-off world, but a community that had claimed them, its strength woven into their own. Sarah walked beside her mother, the weight of the past lighter now, replaced by a future she could shape. She was Daniel Kane's daughter, a keeper of his legacy, a voice for those who carried silent burdens. The patch, the medal, the jacket, they were hers, not to hide but to honor, a fire that burned bright against Willow Creek's sky, a legacy forged in courage and claimed in truth.